Warning: the following video will include spoilers for Arcane. Viewers' discretion is advised. Enjoy.
Now, before you start typing your long paragraphs in defense of Vi, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. In this video, I actually plan on defending Vi.
My hero.
So what exactly prompted such a misleading title? While I'm currently obsessing over Arcane like everybody else, I simply cannot get over the plethora of insightful video essays that have to do with this masterpiece. Whether people are talking about its storytelling techniques, the goated animation, the incredibly well-written characters. I mean, there's even a video essay that goes into depth about how the show uses colors. It's always intriguing to see how others assess and analyze the show, mainly concerning its characters. So when I saw a video pop up in my recommendations called, and I quote, "Vi is a horrifically toxic sister" by YouTube channel JaruJaruJ, and I really hope I said that right. I can't lie, I was curious to see what their argument would be, so I watched it, and I have thoughts. Now, before I can bring up his points and further dive into the contents of his analysis, I first want to establish where I stand with Vi. If you've seen my reactions to Season 1, specifically referring to Episode 9, I acknowledge that perhaps I was too hard on her. After my first watch of the very heart-wrenching tea party in the finale, as someone who was and still is so emotionally attached to Jinx, at the time I had been very disappointed with Vi that she couldn't seem to understand her, let alone realize how much she was unintentionally hurting her. It wasn't until I rewatched the season that I realized how much I truly misunderstood Vi. Of course, this all circles back to who you are as the viewer. I've heard people say that younger siblings tend to connect more with Jinx, or older siblings tend to relate more to Vi. Well, for me, as a middle child, I kinda get both sides. I mean, after all, I'm a little sister to someone just as well as I'm a big sister to someone else. But even then, I saw a little bit more of myself in Jinx as opposed to Vi. Both Vi and Jinx are emotional characters, but how they handle their emotions is very different. Similar to myself, Jinx wears her heart on her sleeve. If she's feeling a type of way about anything, you'll know just by looking at her. She never really seems as though she's trying to mask how she feels. Not to mention, I totally understand her tendency to jump to conclusions. Though not my proudest trait, it's something we unfortunately share. Vi, on the other hand, is more guarded emotionally, so when she does eventually hit her emotional ceiling, she tends to channel those intense feelings into action, which makes her reckless and further causes her to lash out, which we often see puts her and others in these really dangerous situations. Now, because of my own life experiences, people who react like that usually tend to frustrate me. So when I saw this pattern in Vi, initially I wasn't quite sure how I felt about her. Only now do I realize how much of that was just me projecting my own feelings onto her. Now that I've established my stance on Vi, let's really dive into this conversation. Is Vi a toxic sister? Now, if you are a die-hard Vi stan, please brace yourself because there are some strong opinions ahead. And even for me, as I watched the video, I quickly realized that there had to be 3 possible factors in this. 1, it's clearly rage bait and I simply fell for it. 2, he's an only child. Or 3, he fundamentally doesn't understand the character of Vi. So, going into the video, Jaru mentions that because Vi is the protagonist of the series, he felt that many of the viewers gave her a pass on her mistakes. But the thing that ultimately pushed him to make the video was a take he saw online that stated how Silco, not Vi, was responsible for the creation of Jinx. His frustration with this take is probably the only thing I saw myself agreeing with him, because after he said that, he added, and I quote, "And then Jinx said it was Vi's fault, and they claimed that she was wrong." But that's the thing, there never was a fault. I always find it interesting to see how people interpret that line. Because in reality, yes, both Vi and Silco played roles in shaping the present-day Jinx. But if we're looking at it through that lens, well, so did Milo, and so did the circumstances that they faced growing up. See, if you revisit that scene, Jinx doesn't exactly accuse Vi of creating her. Although a bit twisted, she credits her for it. We have to remember that Jinx is everything Powder always wanted to be. Her inventions finally work now. She's strong. She no longer runs from fights. As a matter of fact, she can hold her own. Very well. In her eyes, she's evolved into the version of herself that she was always striving for. It always came across as less of a blame game and more of Jinx giving Vi that credit. To Jinx, Vi played a huge role in shaping that transformation. Throughout their childhood, Vi was Powder's source of encouragement, pushing her to be better, to believe in her abilities. And even though Vi never intended for things to turn out the way they did, Jinx sees herself as the product of everything Vi instilled in her. In a way, she's acknowledging that without Vi's influence, she might not have become the person she is now. Yes, she's flawed and she's dangerous, but in that same breath, she's also extremely powerful and capable. Jaru's interpretation that Vi ruins the life of everyone she encounters is a very reductive way of understanding her relationships, but also the complexity of her and Jinx's character development. So, right off the bat, he starts off by referencing the bridge scene, claiming that Vi takes Powder to the bridge and exposes her to death. While it's true that the bridge was no place for a child, there's a lot more to consider here. In this scene, we witness Vi discovering the bodies of her parents, suggesting that the girls had likely been left alone at home. Now, realistically, we don't know how long they've been on their own. It could have been days before Vi went looking for her parents. What was she supposed to do? Leave a, I'm assuming, 5-year-old Powder unsupervised? Very much so like Vander, Vi is a protector at heart. Throughout the series, she consistently takes on this role, whether it's protecting Powder, Milo and Clagger, Vander, Caitlyn, and even Echo later on. The way I see it, leaving Powder at home, especially in the Undercity, was never an option for Vi. She needed to keep her close where she could watch over her. In fact, Vi goes to great lengths, even abandoning her own innocence, to preserve Powder's and shield her from the horrors of the world by having her cover her eyes and sing to drown out the sounds of battle. As if that critique wasn't egregious enough, he goes on to fault Vi for being too consumed by her own, understandably intense emotions to comfort Powder in that moment. It's honestly frustrating how often people overlook the fact that just like Powder, Vi was also a child in Act 1. Yet Vi is rarely given grace for her actions. It's honestly just unfortunate. In this part of the video, Jaru claims that Vi dragged Powder along on their heist despite her being a child, and taught her that stealing from innocent people stealing from innocent people was acceptable. He then connects this to Jinx's later actions, specifically her theft of the Hextech Orb on Progress Day, attributing it to a learned behavior instilled by Vi. Jaru argues that Vi assigning Powder to watch over the stolen goods ultimately set her down the path of guarding Silco's stolen goods. It was at this point that I realized Jaru was giving Vi more credit than Jinx ever did. In fact, much of what happened in Act 1, particularly in regard to Powder, is attributed by Jaru almost entirely blaming Vi. For example, he claims that Vi picking a fight with Deckard taught Powder to prioritize violence over diplomacy. That tossing the hall to Powder and inadvertently setting her up to lose it reinforced her feelings of inadequacy, further fueling her obsession with earning approval. And that Vi encouraging Powder to build and use bombs serves as evidence of her being a deeply flawed individual. Yeah, it was a lot to take in. Let's establish a few key points. At this stage, both Vi and Powder are still children. Now, in particular, Vi is what some people might call a parentified child, forced to take on the responsibility of raising her younger sister. Let's not forget to mention that they weren't just born into poverty. They were raised in the Undercity, a place that offers no protection for children. Now, realistically, growing up in such an environment exposes you to the harsher realities of life. It's a stark contrast to the sheltered and privileged upbringing of someone like Caitlyn. This difference in experience is evident when Caitlyn ventures into the Undercity in Act 2, and here her naivety is showcased and it becomes her disadvantage.
You almost got me killed.
My little sister could do that when she was 7. All us fisherfolk can. Don't you want to blend in?
Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that it's okay to expose children to trauma. But in Vi's case, raising Powder in the undercity while attempting to shelter her from those realities, she would have been doing her a huge disservice. Now, this is highlighted when Milo says this.
Don't bullshit me. We're twice the person at half our age.
None of the kids should have to be twice the person at half their age, but they realize that they need to be if they are to survive, because there is just simply no way to survive in that environment without understanding the dangers that constantly surround you. In places like the Undercity, ignorance can be fatal, and those who grow up there often become hardened by these experiences. When it comes to the heist and her teaching Powder it's okay to steal from innocent people, because all innocent people totally keep unstable objects that can bomb the entire street corner in their apartments, I prefer to look at it through a different lens. The kids aren't just stealing to steal, they're stealing for survival, which is why stories and characters like Robin Hood are so layered. When the rich continue to get richer, the poor become more desperate. They could use whatever they obtain topside to sell or pawn for something that could easily put food on their tables and clothes on their back. Something that no one in Piltover is going without, as Vi made very clear.
Look around you. You think anyone topside's going hungry?
So from this point alone, I find it really hard to fault them, especially when the system and the people that collectively run it have the power to actually do something about their unfortunate circumstances, yet don't even really care enough to do so. Until it's too late, of course. So while it's easy to criticize a 14 or 15-year-old's decisions, it's important to recognize the context of her upbringing and the environment she was navigating. Yes, it turns out that she is in fact a flawed person based on some of the actions she took, but those actions were shaped by survival in a world where innocence is a luxury that she simply couldn't afford. Now we all remember this touching scene. After seeing how disheartened her little sister is, Vi takes Powder up to the rooftop to give her a much-needed pep talk. Here, Vi reassures Powder that it's okay to make mistakes, that everyone has their off days. When Powder confides in her that she still has the mysterious blue crystals from the heist, Vi tells her to keep it a secret from Vander. Some have interpreted this as Vi's pride coming through, but I disagree. Yes, Vi is brash and reckless at times, but prideful? That's a stretch. I saw this moment as Vi realizing that they didn't come back empty-handed. The crystals to her represent something valuable, something that proves her efforts weren't entirely in vain, that the trouble that they got into wasn't all for nothing. And this subtly reassures Powder that she didn't jinx the mission. In fact, she was the one to walk away with something of worth when no one else did. And let's not forget the key detail. Neither Vi or Powder knew that these blue crystals were the cause of the explosion. Powder doesn't even make this discovery until episode 3 during her meltdown when the crystals accidentally spill onto the floor. Another claim is that Vi saying one day the city's going to respect us somehow plants an obsession in Powder, feeding into this inferiority complex. While it's true that Vi is projecting here, it's not some manipulative move. Vi herself struggles with an inferiority complex, something clearly shown in her interactions with Vander, like in the bridge scene.
I grew up knowing I'm less than them, that my place is down there. I want Powder to have more than that, and I'm willing to fight for it.
In this moment, Vi is encouraging Powder the only way she knows how, telling her that their lives won't always be about just surviving. She's trying to lift Powder up, seeing her own self-doubt reflected in her little sister. To watch this scene and reduce it as Vi is prideful misses the deeper layers at play. Now, after all the criticism Vi has faced for forcing Powder to tag along on dangerous missions, Jaru does a complete 180, expressing his displeasure with Vi when she tells Powder that she has to sit out the Vander rescue mission. He argues that this is Vi revealing she views Powder the same way Milo does, as weak and incapable. While it's true that this isn't what Powder wanted to hear in that moment, as we see later in her emotional breakdown, this was arguably the most responsible decision Vi could have made. Vi had just witnessed firsthand the very real and dangerous threat that Silco had posed. She saw the brutal deaths of Grayson and Benzo, events that shifted the entire stakes. This wasn't some quick hit-and-run job in Piltover where Vi felt 100% sure they could get in and out without much consequence. No, this was life or death. and Vi in this moment wasn't willing to gamble with her little sister's life. This decision was driven not by a view of Powder as weak, but by Vi's intense protective instinct. After all the dangerous situations they've navigated before, Vi understood that this was on a different level. While yes, this moment psychologically cuts deep for the both of them, mainly Powder, Vi's decision has nothing to do with manipulation or seeing Powder as weak. It's about Vi stepping into a role of protector, recognizing the very real dangers at play, and making the tough call to keep her sister safe. Jaru states that the result of that night is all Vi's fault, yet Powder is the one saddled with all the guilt. And I'm sorry, but what? While Jinx's guilt has transformed her in a more drastic way, it's clear Vi is just as burdened by the weight of that night. Her entire arc after Act 1 revolves around her guilt and trying to reconcile with Jinx, hoping to repair their broken bond. We see Vi dealing with guilt in Act 1 after her and Vander talk on the bridge, and she later decides her best course of action is to turn herself in to protect her family. We see the same guilt on display in Act 2 after her injury leaves her delirious and she starts hallucinating and seeing Powder, and it's highlighted even more in Act 3 when she opens up to Caitlyn, revealing that she feels she wasn't there for Powder when she needed her most. Guilt is woven into every part of Vi's journey, just as much as it is Jinx's.
I can't leave her again.
You can't change her.
I have to try.
Now, this last section really took the cake. After Powder accidentally kills Milo and Clagger, thinking she was helping, as we all know, Vi and Powder have an explosive falling out. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. Now, the revelation that Powder was behind the bomb is what initially sends Vi over the edge, and in a moment of high emotion, she strikes her little sister. Now, yes, I will admit, the first time I saw this scene, I was shocked that Vi out of everyone would be the one to enact violence onto her. Especially after we've been following her these past 2 episodes, and I've watched her protect and take accountability for all of Powder's mishaps, even in times when perhaps she should have been more firm with her. It wasn't until my rewatch that I realized that her reaction actually made perfect sense. Vi's impulsive nature becomes more apparent when she's faced with intense emotions. She has this pattern of rushing into dangerous situations, often without thinking, and letting her anger drive her decisions. When her emotions run high, her first instinct is to lash out physically, channeling that energy into action. And this is showcased multiple times throughout the series.
He's gonna know we're here now. Whose fault is that?
Now, hitting Powder, while I don't condone it and found it extremely devastating, it is her character being consistent. At this time, she's overwhelmed by the death of Vander and the boys, and she's crushed by the weight of Powder's mistake. This is a huge failure to her in her eyes, and her grief and her anger bubble over in a way she can't control, leading to the physical outburst. The way Jaru goes on about this scene in particular, he implies that Vi has a history of being physically abusive towards Powder, and he even uses footage of Vi and Powder arguing from the Enemy music video where we see Powder fall to the ground and Vi slap an object out of anger. Now, me personally, I never got the vibe that Vi hitting her was a recurring issue, and I actually felt it was the first time she'd ever done so, mainly because after she strikes her, we see her look at the literal and figurative blood on her hands with a horrified expression, before distancing herself from Powder, not abandoning her, in order to process her grief and her emotions. He then uses this to say, because Powder admires and looks up to her big sister, that means she's obsessed with her abuser. And even worse, he claims their relationship mirrors that of Joker and Harley Quinn.
What? Nonsense.
It's an absurd take. The real Joker and Harley Quinn dynamic lies in Silco's relationship with Jinx, even to the point where some of their scenes together made me legit uncomfortable. Throughout this video, I didn't once hear him hold Silco accountable for the role he played in molding the person that Jinx is. Sure, you can argue that we never saw Silco physically harm her, but are we supposed to neglect the fact that by his standards, Silco should be just as toxic? He projected his feelings of betrayal by Vander onto a little girl, emotionally abused and manipulated her time after time again, arguably used her as a weapon in his drug empire. And let's not forget that time he had her pumped full of shimmer after she tried going out on her own terms, a drug that one can argue makes her even more unstable. No, he argues that Silco was there for her, saved her, and never once harmed her. And yes, two things can be true. So why is it that we can't extend that same grace for Vi? Silco was and is an adult, pre-time skip and after, whereas the majority of what he's been harshly judging Vi for are all actions and choices made when she was a child. In Arcane, it almost feels as if the writers took great lengths to craft a story so deeply nuanced that it resists any straightforward attempts to assign blame to a single character or faction for the unfolding events. This deliberate complexity is one of the show's greatest strengths. Every character, from Vi to Jinx to Silco to Jace, etc., is written with layers of motivation and trauma and personal history, making it impossible to paint any one person as entirely responsible for the chain of tragedies that define the series. Instead, Arcane explores the intricacies of human relationships, whether it's familial, platonic, or even romantic. Systematic oppression, and even the weight of past choices, emphasizing that no single moment or individual holds the sole blame for the spiraling consequences that shape the world of Piltover and Zaun. One could easily say Jace is solely responsible for Powder killing her entire family and later bombing the council, or Heimerdinger's inaction over the years is the sole reason for the Piltover and Zaun conflict. Or Caitlyn releasing Vi from jail is the sole reason Vi interrupts everything going on in Zaun and further pushes Jinx into madness, leading to the tragedy that is the finale. Examining things through such a limited lens cuts you off from the nuances of the story and the characters that drive these conflicts. Yes, Vi wasn't perfect, but she was doing the best she could in a deeply flawed environment overseen by a deeply flawed system. JaruJaruJ's video seems to hold her to some just unrealistic standard, ignoring the complexities of her upbringing and the fact that both Vi and Powder were products of their environment. In the end, Vi's love for her sister never wavered, even if her actions were imperfect. So no, I don't believe Vi is a horrifically toxic sister. I believe she's a deeply flawed character, navigating impossible circumstances. And like all humans, she makes mistakes, but her intentions are rooted in love and protection.